This is part 4 in a series about the establisher of the Bahá'í faith. After the internal chaos of the early 1960s, Mason Remy issued a new directive to those who remained under the Bahá'í guardianship. They should relocate to the mountains in preparation for possible coming catastrophes. Doc and Opal took the warning seriously, but as licensed naturopathic doctors, they needed to find a state in the mountains where they could legally practice. Montana was the only option. And within Montana, Missoula stood out. Doc had been studying psychology, and Missoula was home to the state's only graduate program in the field. They moved there in 1966, bought a home, and converted the lower floor into a clinic. Doc began school in September, and by October, he and Opal opened their practice. An ad in the local paper announced their services. What follows is Dr. Jensen's account of a series of events that would land him in prison. Not long after setting up their practice in Missoula, Dr. K, the president of the Montana Chiropractic Association, showed up at their door. Dr. K made his position clear right away. He told Doc there were already too many chiropractors in Missoula and suggested firmly that he move to another town after finishing his coursework at the University of Montana. Doc refused. He and Opal had invested in property. They were already established. They weren't going anywhere. Dr. K then invited Doc to an exchange club luncheon and introduced him to the local elite: mayor, city council members, local business leaders, justices of the peace, state legislators. He made sure Doc understood how deeply connected he and his allies were in both political parties. Once again, he asked Doc to leave town, and once again, Doc said no. Over time, Doc and Opal's practice began to thrive. Their background in naturopathic medicine allowed them to offer treatments beyond what most chiropractors could. Word spread, patients found them, and some stopped going to other chiropractors. That didn't sit well with the old guard. Dr. K next invited Doc to Helena, the capital, to help lobby for a chiropractic bill. Once there, he worked the room, shaking hands with senators and representatives, casually dropping names, making sure Doc saw just how well connected he was. On the drive back to Missoula, Doc said plainly, "Dr. K, come hell or high water, you're not going to get me to leave town." Dr. K replied, "We'll see." Not long after, Doc's real estate agent, who moved in the same social circles, warned him that something was brewing. He'd overheard local chiropractors plotting against Doc and Opal. Shortly after, Doc began noticing patients being cornered and questioned outside his office. Then, the sheriff showed up. Doc was arrested and charged with a lewd and lascivious act against a minor. He was stunned. The patient in question was a 15-year-old girl brought in by her parents for severe lower back pain, menstrual cramps, and chronic constipation. After taking x-rays, Doc and Opal diagnosed severe uterine prolapse with rectocele, where the uterus had collapsed onto the lower end of the colon, causing both organs to interfere with each other's functioning. Their treatment plan involved chiropractic manipulation, dietary change, and a manual repositioning of the uterus. Because the girl was a virgin, the procedure was done rectally, a recognized method in traditional medicine. Still, it became the basis for criminal charges. At trial, an expert defense witness testified that the procedure was legitimate and medically sound. But the prosecution introduced 3 adult women to testify that Doc had touched them inappropriately. One of them, Doc didn't even recognize. His attorney chose not to object when the women were called, even though Montana law at the time barred accusations from other alleged victims whose only purpose was to suggest the defendant's bad character or general propensity to commit such acts. His lawyer explained to him that this was perfect grounds for an appeal. The goal, he said, was to let the conviction happen, then have it overturned as a mistrial. He said he had an ace up his sleeve. His brother-in-law was about to be elected state attorney and would grant the mistrial once in office. Doc was uneasy. The plan was to lose the trial and trust a political favor to undo it. Doc was convicted and sentenced to 20 years. And then the plan for appeal collapsed. Just before the election, headlines broke accusing the brother-in-law of taking bribes to shield prostitution rings from police scrutiny. His campaign imploded. He lost the election and with it, any chance of a favorable appeal. Doc's conviction stood. The appeal was denied. And just like that, he found himself behind bars. But prison wasn't the end. Instead, it became the turning point. Behind the bars and walls, stripped of everything familiar, Doc began to have a series of experiences that would cast his ordeal in a very different light. What seemed like the end of his career, his reputation, and his freedom was only the beginning of something far greater, an awakening that would change the course of his life and, as it turns out, the rest of the world. For more information, visit schooloftheland.com.